Questions without notice. I give the call to the honourable member for Herbert.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last week, the Leader of the Opposition met with a Townsville cafe owner whose electricity bill has surged by 404%. Despite the Prime Minister's promise to cut power bills by $275 each year, the Albanese government has had 12 months and 2 budgets to fulfil this promise but has failed to do so. With small businesses struggling and Australian families having to find an extra $22,000 each year to service their mortgage, let alone pay electricity bills, when will the Prime Minister take responsibility for the growing cost of living crisis?
Right. Give the call. Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Herbert for his question. One of the things that this government is doing is taking action. We provided $1.6 billion for energy efficiency upgrades for homes and businesses, including the Small Business Energy Incentive. We had the Rewiring the Nation program, of course. We're rolling out, bringing the energy grid into the 21st century. And of course, we introduced as well our plan to provide certainty to encourage investment through the safeguard mechanism. But importantly as well, we had our energy price relief plan, which shielded Australia from the worst of global price spikes that have occurred, price caps that nearly halved wholesale forward prices for electricity. We provided there up to $3 billion in targeted rebates for households and businesses, up to $500 in bill relief for eligible households, and up to $650 in bill relief for small businesses. But I can imagine people in Queensland today giving a big shout out to the Palaszczuk government and the announcements that they've made overnight, which will, for some pensioners, reduce their energy bills to zero, as a result of what they have done in partnership with this government. So I'm sure that when the member for Herbert returns to Townsville on the weekend, what he'll see, and he'll be able to talk about, he'll be able to say, well, I'm sorry, constituents, that I voted against the energy price relief plan. That's making a difference. But I do recognise what a fantastic job the Palaszczuk government's doing. Because they've used some of the revenues as well. Again, things opposed by those opposite as a result of the windfall gains that are there because of global energy prices have produced in Queensland the largest budget surplus of any state government anywhere since Federation. But of course, they don't recognise something called a surplus over there, just like they didn't recognise the projected surplus from our Treasurer, who can't even get a question about the budget that he brought down a month ago.
Order. Before I call the member for Reid, there's far too much interjecting going on during the first question. Just want to remind members that questions have to be heard in silence and answers will be heard in silence as well. The member for Reid has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's economic plan laying the foundations for a stronger economy into the future after a wasted decade?
Order. The member for Deakin will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the wonderful member for Reid for her question. She's now asked twice as many questions as the Shadow Treasurer since the budget reply. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government's economic plan is all about helping people through difficult times, as it's at the same time as we lay the foundations for a stronger economy into the future. Now, we know, Mr Speaker, that those opposite failed when it came to productivity. It's a big part, a big defining feature of the wasted decade of missed opportunities that they were responsible for. And if you don't take my word for it, Mr Speaker, then listen to the Shadow Finance Minister, Senator Jane Hume. She was asked by Tom Connell, Do you sort of put your hand up and say maybe we didn't do enough on this when we were in government? Jane Hume, look, I think that governments past have been absolutely remiss in their ability to make a real difference in shifting the dial on productivity. She then went on to say, I'm not going to put my hand on my heart and say, look at all the great things that we did. There's a reason for that, Mr Speaker. Australians are paying a hefty price indeed for this wasted decade under those opposite. They delivered the slowest decade for productivity growth in the last 60 years, Mr Speaker. And while it will take some time for us to turn this around, we are absolutely focused on building a stronger and more productive economy. We are progressing in some form more than two-thirds of the 29 reform directives outlined in the Productivity Commission's 5-yearly inquiry, because we understand that productivity equals prosperity. But we also understand, and this is the difference, Mr Speaker, we know on this side of the House that building a more productive economy isn't about hacking away at people's wages and conditions. It's not about making people work longer hours, and it's not about making them work harder for less money, Mr Speaker. We will get the right kind of productivity growth in this economy in time, Mr Speaker, by investing in the skills and capacities of our people and supporting our businesses to innovate and grow, so that we can manage and maximise some of the big shifts that are underway in our economy, the growth of the care economy, the possibilities of data and digital, and the vast industrial and economic opportunities that come from the transformation to net zero. And that's the reason behind our policies, Mr Speaker, like fee-free TAFE and vocational training, investing in the industries of the future like hydrogen, and supporting businesses to adopt new digital innovations like artificial intelligence, Mr Speaker. This government has a plan to make our economy stronger and more productive so that we can lift incomes, lift living standards, build more successful businesses and clean up the mess left behind by those opposites.
Member for Groom. Order. Members on my right. The member for Swan will resume her seat. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting immediately. So will the member for Gippsland. Member for Hume has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The budget highlighted the expectation that interest rates would stay at 3.85% until early 2024, then fall. Following an 11th rate rise under this government, rates are now at 4.1%. Prime Minister, why did the budget fail within a month?
Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, you can't trust anything. You can't trust anything that the Shadow Treasurer says.
The budget takes an average of the market.
When you look at what the budget papers actually say, the budget papers actually say that in the question that's reflected by the Shadow Treasurer refers to what expectations are by economists.
The average of the market.
It's not a Treasury document.
Hume
it's not in a media release from the Treasurer. It's certainly not. I'll tell you one thing we're certain of. It won't be an answer from the Treasurer from a question from the Shadow Treasurer, because we know that this is something that just doesn't exist. Just doesn't exist. But the last time I got a question, of course, from the Shadow Treasurer, he stood up here and he said, my questions to the Prime Minister, UBS data shows in the last month alone the price of Vegemite has increased by 8%, peanut butter by 9%, and yogurt has increased by 12%. He went on about all this, and then he went on. Then he went on in the MPI. As for the things Australians love, Vegemite is up 8%. Not in a year, in a month. He doubled down. He doubled down.
And of course, Treasurer will cease interjecting.
Andrew Clennell on Sky News. Always watch Sky News. So those opposite would have seen this for sure. For sure. He went on to say that I've got a shadow cabinet leak, Pete, and that is that Angus Taylor yesterday was castigating shadow cabinet ministers.
The Prime Minister will pause. Members on my right, there is far too much noise. A general warning is now issued. That means no one will be warned. They'll just leave the chamber. This cannot continue. The member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. Australians just want to know why—
Resume your seat. The question was brought at the end where you asked why did the budget fail within a month. So the Prime Minister is being relevant. If you ask a broad question with that at the tag, he will be able to answer that, and I give him the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm certainly speaking about months. They're not happy little Vegemites over there, Mr Speaker. They're not happy little Vegemites.
Order. Prime Minister, return to the question.
But he went on to say, maybe Angus doesn't go shopping much because we know inflation's bad and grocery prices are up. But he should have seen that question prepared by his staff, and it went on about the figures in a month and questioned it. Of course, we know before what he said about his staff. Remember the Clover Moore incident?
Prime Minister, return to the question.
It's always the staff. But as Andrew Clennell says so clearly, well, the thing is, after speaking to the Shadow Cabinet, briefing out against the Shadow Treasurer, well, the thing is, this is one of a number of gaffes. Mr Speaker, how can you tell there's a gaffe coming? Because he opens his mouth.
Order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Swan.
My question is to the Minister for Health. The Community and Health and Hospitals program was recently scrutinised by the Australian National Audit Office. Why is it important that every health dollar is invested wisely? What lessons can be learnt from the recent Audit Office report?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Swan for her question, a terrific new member in this House, doing a terrific job representing the people of her community in WA. And she knows that after 9 years of cuts and neglect to Medicare from those opposite, it has never been harder to see a doctor than it is right now, which means now more than ever, every dollar spent in health is precious. That's why, Mr Speaker, the member for Swan and the team on this side went to the last election promising to strengthen Medicare, and we delivered on that promise in the May budget with a $6 billion package to strengthen Medicare, Mr Speaker. The centrepiece of that package was $3.5 billion to triple the bulk billing incentive. Now, we remember on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, the father of the modern Liberal Party, John Howard, describing bulk billing as an absolute roar. We remember the Leader of the Opposition in his first budget as Health Minister trying to abolish bulk billing altogether. But for Labor, Mr Speaker, bulk billing is the beating heart of Medicare. Yeah. Now, more broadly, the contrast between our budget and the approach of the former government could not be clearer. They cut billions of dollars from Medicare with a 6-year-long Medicare rebate freeze, but they found $2 billion to build a fund to take to the 2019 election that will allow them to travel the country announcing their hand-picked project. And as the member for Swan said last week, the Audit Office published a scathing report into this program, just the latest in a series of funding scandals by the Morrison government that breached even the most basic principles of public administration. Now, the report details project after project, Mr Speaker, where no expressions of interest were sought, no suitability assessments were made at all. The department was forced to monitor the media, to watch the TV, to learn which projects had been announced by the government as they travelled the country. The Audit Office found that of the 63 major projects, only 2 ended up being assessed as highly suitable. Only 2 out of 63, and they found that administration of the other 100 grants were, and I quote the Audit Office report, not appropriate and involved deliberate breaches of the relevant legal requirements. Deliberate breaches of the relevant legal requirements, Mr Speaker. And then, as we saw right through the period of the Morrison government, the delivery of this program was hopeless, because it was always about the announcement with this government, always about the media release, never about changing things for ordinary Australians. Well, Mr Speaker, we are implementing all of the recommendations from the Audit Office. Each one of the remaining projects from this program are assessed for value for money for taxpayers. We are determined to clean up the mess that was left to us by the former government because, as the member for Swan said, every dollar spent in health is precious.
Order. Before I call the member for Griffith, I'd like to warmly welcome more representatives from the Shire Councils from across Australia, but also I've been advised from the member for Lyons we have Michelle Tricolis, the Derwent Valley Mayor for Tasmania, and the member for Lingiari has advised me that Councillor Matt Patterson and Councillor Ali Battar are here, the Mayor of Alice Springs Council as well. A very warm welcome to you all. And I give the call to the member for Griffith.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer you to your reported comments that coordinating a freeze on rent increases with states is absurd and untenable and would amount to nationalisation. Prime Minister, was it absurd when you coordinated with the states to cap energy prices? Has the ACT Labor Greens government nationalised the private rental market with its rent controls? Or did National Cabinet nationalise housing when it coordinated a freeze in 5 states and territories during the pandemic? Will you finally act on rent increases at National Cabinet and freeze rent increases with the states?
Order. Call the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I say to the member for Griffith that he's a member of the House of Representatives, and in our federated structure there is the Commonwealth Government, there's state governments and there's local government. And state governments, of course, have controls over housing issues. The matters that he refers to, once again, is disingenuous. There is no rent freeze in the ACT. None. There is no rent freeze in the ACT. There is no rent freeze in the ACT. There is not a jurisdiction in the ACT that has done that. What we have is a comprehensive plan, a National Housing Accord, a partnership with industry, super funds and states and territories to build 1 million homes, the Housing Australia Future Fund that the member wants to block that would produce 30,000 social and affordable rental homes.
Order.
National Cabinet has agreed to strengthen renters' rights, and we'll be having the next meeting that will be on the agenda. We have planning reforms as well to increase housing supply and affordability. We have incentives to increase build-to-rent that will result in 150,000 additional dwellings. We've provided an additional $2 billion in financing to the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation. We expanded eligibility for the Home Guarantee Scheme, and we had the largest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance in 30 years. That is what we have put forward. But the member has never seen a housing development that he wants to support. Because if you look at the member's website, it currently hosts at least 3 separate petitions against housing supply. He opposes 855 new homes, including apartments, townhouses and detached houses on a 20-hectare site for over 2,000 extra residents. This is what he has to say. I also have significant concerns over what 2,000 extra residents will do for traffic.
Order.
He opposes new homes for another 960 residents. In another petition, he's opposing turning a vacant block of land in Holland Park West into a retirement village, even offering supporters a yard sign to demonstrate their opposition to housing. So don't come in here and say you support housing when you won't support any in your own electorate, and when you're opposing 30,000 new additional social and affordable housing units, including 4,000 designated for women and children escaping domestic violence.
Well, the members on my right will cease interjecting so I can hear from the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. How will the Net Zero Economy Agency help strengthen Australia's economy, and who will be leading that work?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Macquarie for her question and for her advocacy on behalf of her electorate, which is one of the electorates that, of course, will be impacted, the beautiful Blue Mountains and the wonderful electorate she represents on the outskirts of Sydney, if climate change is allowed to just continue into the future. And that's why we adopted a net zero target by 2050. And that's why today I was very proud to announce the Chair and Advisory Board of the Net Zero Economy Agency. Last month, the government committed to this agency in our budget to establish it from the 1st of July. Now, its mission will be to ensure that the Australian economy, our workers and our regions are in the best possible position to realise the benefits that are there from moving to a net zero economy. It will make sure we're channeling investments into transformational projects, creating pathways for the workers and businesses that have powered Australia for generations to take advantage of these new opportunities. I'm very pleased that Greg Combet has agreed to be the chair of that body. Greg Combet is someone who has a lifetime of service in government, in investment, in climate policy and industrial relations. And I'm surprised that there's some interjection from those opposite, because the former government appointed, the Morrison government appointed Greg Combet to serve on the National COVID Coordination Commission in recognition of his expertise and his capacity. He'll be advised by a very impressive group of experts and professionals. Professor Ross Garnaut, of course, Professor Paul Simshauser, Anthea Harris, the CEO of the Australian Energy Regulator, Nicole Lockwood, the Chair of Infrastructure WA, Michelle O'Neill, the President of the ACTU, Kelly Parker, the CEO of Rio Tinto Australia, Anthea Harris, the CEO of the Australian Energy Regulator, Professor Robin Quiggin, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of UTS, Tony Marr, the General President of the Mining and Energy Union, Laura Tyler, the Chief Technical Officer of BHP, and Anna Scarbeck, the CEO of Climate Works, the Director of the Green Building Council of Australia. Mr Speaker, this will be an important body that will have an important task of making sure that the community comes with the nation as we move forward to net zero, that we take advantage of the opportunities which are there. And that's why today's announcement is an important step going forward in a positive way.
Order. The Minister for Resources and the member for Fisher will cease their conversation across the chamber. Give the call to the Honourable Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. We all support cheaper medicines, but the government's new dispensing rule is asking community pharmacies to pay for it. Will the minister provide modelling that demonstrates no community pharmacies will see job losses or closures under this policy?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, Mr Speaker, I relish yet another opportunity to talk about this government's commitment to cheaper medicines. We went to the election last year promising to deliver cheaper medicines to millions of Australian patients. In July last year, we managed to cut the safety net for millions of pensioners by 25%, the maximum amount pensioners would pay for all of their medicines needs across a year. It's only now $5.05 per week for all of their medicines needs. We cut the price of 2,000 brands of medicine in September, delivering $130 million back into the pockets of hard-working Australian patients. And as I might have said once or twice at this dispatch box, Mr Speaker, on January 1, we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS. Now, we know there is more to do. We know there is more to do, Mr Speaker, which is why we accepted advice that had lay on the table for 5 years from the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee to allow 60-day dispensing of medicines for chronic disease, very common across all of the countries to which we usually compare ourselves, medicines that people are on for years and years, if not decades.
Minister will pause. The Leader of the Nationals is highly disorderly before he's called to start speaking at the dispatch box. I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals
on
a point of order.
Mr Speaker, this is a very tight question. We've been very patient. It goes to the heart of the minister providing the modelling that demonstrates no community pharmacies will see job losses or closures. Nothing about cheaper medicines. It was about the modelling. The modelling, the pharmacies that he's going to destroy.
Order. Resume your seat. Order. Members on my right, the member for Macarthur is warned. I'm going to hear from the Leader of the House. I think I know where this is going.
To the point of order, where the Leader of the National Party just said that the question said nothing about cheaper medicines, the first sentence of the question was, "We all support cheaper medicines."
Order, order, order. There was a question in there, but there was also a preamble around cheaper medicines, and in particular about the government's dispensing rules and asking pharmacies to pay for it. So obviously, if that's part of the question, the minister is going to be entirely in order to talk about that. Understanding Order 104 is pretty clear about how ministers are being relevant. I'm listening to him carefully. If he strays off the topic, doesn't refer to the question, he'll be pulled back into order, but I'm going to listen to make sure he is relevant. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Nationals again. I contest the supposition in the opening sentence that all of this parliament is committed to cheaper medicines. As I said, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee gave the former government
the Leader of the Nationals has asked his question.
Advice that government should consider 60-day dispensing for common medicines for chronic disease. Very common across the countries to which we would usually compare ourselves, reflecting the changing nature of the patient profile with much more chronic disease. That means that patients are on the same medicine for year after year, sometimes decade after decade, don't have to traipse up to the pharmacy every single month, traipse up to the GP every single 6 months.
The minister will pause. The minister will pause. The Leader of the Nationals will leave the chamber. The member for Wright will follow soon if he continues with that. Order. The minister has 1 minute remaining in his answer, and the member for Riverina will cease interjecting so I can hear from him in silence.
Now, the Leader of the Nationals said we all support cheaper medicines, but when that advice was provided to the former government 5 years ago, they decided to do nothing about it. Instead, they required all of those millions of patients to traipse to the pharmacy every single month, and over those intervening 5 years pay hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in co-payments that the advisory committee overseeing the PBS said was unnecessary. Now, this is a policy that will halve the cost of these chronic disease medicines for millions of patients. It's a policy that will improve their health. We have said that every dollar saved by the Commonwealth will be reinvested back into community pharmacy.
Order.
We're in the process of finalising the detail of that, talking with pharmacy groups across the sector, particularly focused on smaller rural pharmacies to make sure that the impact on those rural pharmacies is mitigated. We want a viable community pharmacy sector, and instead of politicising this issue, maybe the opposition should work with us.
Order. Give the call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to protect our beautiful oceans and our iconic marine environments for the sake of our kids and for our grandkids?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Fremantle for that terrific question. I know no one is more committed to ocean conservation than he is. And Mr Speaker, it's been a huge couple of weeks for ocean conservation in Australia. Last Monday, our government officially announced our decision to triple the size of the Macquarie Island Marine Park, adding an area of highly protected ocean larger than the size of Germany. This is one of the most important decisions that will be made for ocean conservation anywhere in the world this year, and I'm very proud of it. Macquarie Island is a unique place. It's the only island on Earth where royal penguins breed. It's one of the few places where endangered albatross come to land to rest. It's the home of elephant seals and killer whales and a whole range of other rare fish. We are talking about a place that is globally unique and globally significant. And with this decision, we are massively increasing our protection of the endangered animals that call this beautiful place home. It's why the Australian Marine Conservation Society called it a massive win for the region's globally significant marine life. And, Mr Speaker, we also had another piece of very encouraging news to share with Australians recently about our efforts to increase protections for the Great Barrier Reef. Last week, the head of UNESCO praised our government's policies, saying that our policies to combat climate change, to improve water quality and to protect endangered species were significant. Previously, UNESCO had said that the difference between the new government and the previous government, the old one, were a bit like night and day, and that is certainly the case.
Order.
Last week, we took our efforts even further by investing with the Government of Queensland $160 million to make sure that we are reducing high-risk fishing activities on the reef and supporting more sustainable practices. The new funding means that the reef will be free of gill nets by 2027. Gill nets are an absolute menace for dolphins, for dugongs, for turtles, for a range of endangered creatures, and that's why we're stepping in to ban them. WWF called our decision globally significant, a globally significant moment for ocean conservation, fisheries management and the Great Barrier Reef. Mr Speaker, our government is proud of these efforts to better protect nature, to protect what's precious, to restore what's damaged and to make sure that we're managing nature better for the future.
I'll just call the Leader of the House.
During that answer, an unparliamentary comment was made by the member for New England and it should be withdrawn.
I'll ask the member for New England to withdraw to assist the House.
I withdraw.
Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In the Senate yesterday, the Minister for Finance stated that she did not communicate to the member for Grainler or anyone in his office any aspect of information she had received concerning an alleged sexual assault prior to 15 February 2021. Prime Minister, has Senator Gallagher misled the Senate?
The member for Deakin does not need to make noises when someone is. If you do that again, I've been crystal clear on this. Honestly, the member for Wannon will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
No.
I give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Cyber Security. How is the Albanese Labor government fixing the patchwork of policies and poorly implemented cyber security measures left behind by the previous government?
Give the call. I'll hear. The Minister will resume her seat. Order. Members on my right. The same rules apply to both sides of the chamber. There will be no interjections whilst a minister is approaching the dispatch box. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, yesterday you were very clear that ministers could only be asked about questions which fall within their current responsibilities. This question clearly breaches that principle and is out of order.
Order. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the question asks what the government is doing to fix a particular problem. It refers to the previous government in creating that problem, but the question is about the government fixing it, which is entirely the job of the minister and a job that she's doing.
The Manager on a further point of order.
Mr Speaker, you were very clear in your statement of the principle yesterday. I'm sure you want to be absolutely consistent in how you apply that principle on both sides of the chamber. The principle is very clear that ministers cannot be asked about matters which occurred before they became a minister. You've stated that principle and it should be upheld in relation to this question.
Order. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, just to the point of order, because none of this is complicated, from the manager of opposition business. The principle that was dealt with yesterday goes to the actions of a minister before they became minister, and that was what all the points of order about yesterday were about. The question today that has just been asked is about the actions a minister is taking now to fix up a mess that was left to this government.
Correct.
Order. I want to respond to the manager. He raises a point. The principle I was talking about yesterday, and I want to be clear for all members regarding practice, which makes clear what ministers cannot be asked questions about their actions, and it states very clearly on page 554, in a former ministerial role or as a private member before becoming a minister, also on page 554. This question is about what the government is doing now. The minister is responsible, obviously, for these portfolio responsibilities. I'm going to listen carefully to her response to make sure she is updating the House with her remarks regarding, however she answers it, regarding the policies, but she's obviously able to talk about what the government or her responsibilities are to deal with the relevant issues that she sees fit. So the question is within order, but I'll listen carefully to make sure she is being relevant and to give her the call.
Thank you, Speaker. And look, Speaker, I've got to be honest, I understand why this is such a touchy subject for those opposite. If I had wasted a decade on the benches behind me, then I would feel pretty touchy about it too. But what I can tell you is that we have a bunch of ministers sitting here who will be proud of their record after sitting on these benches and proud to have our record examined by the opposition when that time comes. Now, Speaker, I'll turn to the question at hand.
The member for Page.
Now, Speaker, the member for Werra asked a really good question, and she's very intimately involved in the debate and the discussion about these subjects. And she, unfortunately, is right in her description. Because, Speaker, when we arrived in office a year ago, we found cybersecurity in an absolute mess. Now, that is a serious problem for our country because anyone involved in this space can tell you that cybersecurity is one of the most important national security challenges we face. We've got a packed public gallery today. It is statistically probable that every person up there or a member of their family has been the victim of a data breach or a cyber attack over previous years. Now, if I had left that, I can understand why those opposite don't want to have their record questioned. And I'll say particularly for the opposition leader who sits opposite me, Speaker, who likes to present himself as a bit of a tough guy. Now, we know we had no cybersecurity minister under the previous government. The opposition leader was the Home Affairs Minister for much of the time in government. This national security matter is in a mess, and there is no one more responsible for that mess than the opposition leader. Now, this has had real consequences for our country. We had the National Australia Bank tell us a year ago that they are subjected to 50 million cyber attacks a month. The Australian Taxation Office is subjected to 3 million cyber attacks a month. So our focus over this last year has been trying to clean up the mess left by those opposite and set us on a path for doing better as a country. And that's why, Speaker, we've set up Hack the Hackers, a task force of Australian Federal Police and Australian Signals Directorate officers, 100 people who are out there finding people who are seeking to do Australians harm and trying to hack back. We've taken leadership of a global ransomware initiative for the first time Australia trying to coordinate the actions of countries around the world who share those same threats. We have declared 82 systems of national significance, things like our electricity grid, the providers of water, to make sure that they are taking their cybersecurity responsibilities seriously. We've begun national cyber exercises for the first time where industries around this country are coming together, working out how they will cope with these challenges. Now, this is just what has been done over this previous year, Speaker, but there is so much more to come. A really important moment for the country on this matter will be the release of the cybersecurity strategy a little bit later this year. There is huge focus and energy and resolve on this matter for the first time. We're cleaning up the mess left by those opposite, but most importantly, making sure that in this internet age, we're providing proper safety and security for our constituents. Thank you, Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition just said that he wants to indicate to support the minister's remarks.
Mr. Speaker,
on that basis.
Mr. Speaker, associate the opposition with the minister's cause in terms of sending a very clear message to those who would seek to commit offences online against children or against elderly people in particular. This is a very serious topic. It requires an adult response, and it is important that our friends and our adversaries understand that this parliament stands united in the fight against the scourge of criminal activity online. The same rules should apply online as they do in the real life. The targets that we see of institutions and systems of national significance are very real. And when we were in government, we put, I know it's not a great deal of money, but $9.9 billion into the Australian Signals Directorate. We bolstered the funding to the Australian cyber security system. We spent more on cyber security than any government in the country's history. And so we stand, Mr Speaker, united in the fight against those criminals online.
The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting immediately. The Minister for Cyber Security will cease interjecting. Look. The Deputy Leader will resume her seat for a moment. The Leader of the Opposition just cannot be slamming people across the chamber. Order. 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 The House. The Minister for Cyber Security will cease interjecting. So will the Leader of the Opposition. Question time is about a level of decorum, and I want that to continue for the remainder of question time today. Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment. I refer to the Minister's answers in question time yesterday relating to allegations broadcast on the project. When did the Minister first become aware of these allegations?
Order. Order. I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, we're back to where we were yesterday in terms of it's the same point of order that I took yesterday. Whether a statement has been made outside the House or inside the House, the rules in practice are the same when it refers to something before somebody became a minister, which is the question has to be about the statement. It can't simply be a reference to the statement and then a question about something else. And exactly the problem that arose yesterday arises with this question, only it's about a statement inside the House rather than outside, but practice treats the two identically when it refers to something where the event itself occurred prior to the person becoming a minister.
I'm going to ask the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to rephrase the question to make sure it is within standing orders. These questions are problematic. I'm just going to ask her to make sure that she's either referring directly to a comment or quote within the statement so that it can be relevant. To simply refer to the statement and ask something else is not within the standing orders. So I'll just ask her to rephrase the question to make sure it is relevant.
Mr Speaker, may I address your ruling and to your ruling? Yesterday the question was eventually ruled in order, and there is a long-standing convention that questions can be asked about answers that were given in question time the day before or at any other previous time. This question refers to public statements that the minister has made, answers that she gave yesterday relating to those public statements, and at the heart of the question are her answers from yesterday. I ask that you rule the question in order.
I'm just going to ask you to read the question again.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment. I refer to the Minister's answers in question time yesterday relating to allegations broadcast on the project. When did the Minister first become aware of these allegations?
Order. Order. Resume your seat. Order. I'll hear from the Minister for Environment will cease interjecting. I'll hear again from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I simply want to quote the same section of practice that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition herself quoted yesterday. It's the same sentence, it's page 555, where ministers have made statements either inside or outside the House about matters that may concern their actions before becoming a member and/or a minister. Questions have been permitted on those statements. This question is not on the statement.
Order. I'll hear from the manager.
Well, Mr Speaker, in the previous parliament, a very similar situation arose where a question was asked of a minister in relation to what the minister had said previously. That was the subject of some deliberation, and the then manager of opposition business had this to say, quote, "Ministers have a responsibility to the House when they provide that information and for us to be able to test that information." Now, that is precisely what the Deputy Leader of the Opposition is doing in the question that she has asked. The proposition that the then Manager of Opposition Business put was upheld, and it should be upheld today as well.
The difficulty I have, as I explained to the House yesterday, is that whilst a minister may give a remark or statement to the House, she can be questioned about those words. You can't add extra things on to that statement about information you may wish to have or undertake, because the minister was not responsible at the time. So she's responsible for her words and actions since she's been a minister, but also in the House. So I'll give the Deputy Opposition Leader one more time to rephrase the question, not to add another question into a statement that she answered yesterday. It's got to be about the statement. It is very narrow about what you can ask. So I'll give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment, and I refer to the Minister's answers in question time yesterday, where she said, "I 100% stand by what I said on Monday and 100% stand by what I have done at every stage with respect to allegations aired on the project." When did the Minister first become aware of these allegations?
I'm ruling the question out of order. I'm moving. Order. Order. I'm moving to the next question. The end part of the question is out of order. You can ask about the statement, but that is a clear order. The member for Groom will leave the chamber under 94A. We'll move to the next question. The member for Fraser has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How will the Albanese Labor government's action on energy prices deliver cost of living relief for households and businesses? What has been the response?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question and his policy leadership in this House. And I'm pleased to report to the honourable member that his constituents and all Victorians have avoided price rises in relation to electricity of $555 a household. And for small businesses in Victoria, it's $955. Now, Mr Speaker, in other states the savings have been even bigger. Take South Australia, for example, Mr Speaker. Because of the intervention of the Albanese government last year, a projected 51% price rise for those receiving the government's rebates has changed to a 3% cut in energy prices in South Australia, which is a $992 saving for people in South Australia. And similar figures across the board, $843 of increases avoided in New South Wales, $819 in Queensland, $488 in Tasmania, and so on. These are important savings for households and small businesses. And the honourable member asked me what the response has been, and there have been expert after expert making the point that it is directly the intervention of the government which has led to this bill relief. Expert after expert has said it is the intervention of the government. We saw Claire Savage, the Australian energy regulator, as policy which reduces power prices, not foghorn leghorn interjections from the peanut gallery, as policy interventions which reduce power prices.
The minister will pause. I'm dealing with that. The minister will withdraw that comment and return back to the question.
I withdraw. The energy regulator herself, Mr Speaker, said, "So it's really good to see that all governments have intervened in coal and gas markets, and that has brought down the price expectations in the system." Dr Stephen Kennedy, the Treasury Secretary, has said that the intervention has reduced inflation by reducing power prices directly and clearly. And perhaps most clearly of all, the Governor of the Reserve Bank has said, and I quote, "The regulation in the energy market has had a direct impact on electricity prices over the next year." a direct impact on electricity prices, is what the governor said. And there has been another response, maybe not so much from an expert, from the member for Fairfax. He's had something to say. He was interviewed on Sky News. It was a rather difficult interview for the member for Fairfax on Sky News. He was asked, he gets the tough questions, he was asked about the impact, and he conceded that energy prices were down, but he had a causality problem. He said, so there's no evidence that the intervention itself was the thing that got prices down. So he conceded that prices were down, but he denied. He's a relief denier. He's a relief denier as the member for Fairfax, Mr. Speaker. He tried to deny the relief with his vote, and now he's denying its reality. But apart from the Governor of the Reserve Bank, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Australian Energy Regulator has a point. I'm also advised the honourable member's not sure about the death of Elvis, Mr. Speaker. He hasn't seen enough evidence of that as well.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, it is policy interventions which reduce power prices, not interventions from the peanut gallery.
Well, I couldn't hear what he was saying because of the interjections. So, order. The member for Riverina will resume his seat. I'll deal with this matter. If the minister has said something unparliamentary, I'm going to ask him to withdraw. And the member for Fairfax is warned. Before I call the member for Kooyong, I've also been advised that in the House we have a mayor and councillors from the Campbelltown City Council, from the member MacArthur, and mayors and councillors from the Fairfield City Council in the Fowler electorate. Give a call to the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Minister, last week the ANAO report revealed that the Morrison government acted unethically and unlawfully in administering the $2 billion CHHP grant scheme. Your government has repeatedly condemned the Morrison government's heinous pork barrelling. Are you open to structural changes such as legislating spending on large grant programs to stop this from ever happening again?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for Kooyong for her question. One of the key features of our much more responsible approach to managing the budget is to make sure that we get value for money when we allocate public money, whether it's via grants or in other ways. And the honourable member raised in her question the Community Health and Hospitals program, the $2 billion fund, which attracted a fair bit of criticism from the Audit Office, and my colleague, the Minister for Health, has now addressed that on a couple of occasions. And I know that in the aftermath of that Audit Office report, in light of it, he has asked for more work to be done to make sure that we don't have a repeat of that kind of situation. I also know, Mr. Speaker, that my terrific colleague, the Finance Minister, is doing a heap of work to take into consideration the advice that has been provided via recommendations from the Public Accounts and Audit Report on Administration of Government Grants, as well as the Audit Office report on the award of funding under the Building Better Regions Fund as well. And so the Minister for Finance has asked her department for advice on the most robust way to provide these kinds of grants from the budget into communities right around Australia, and I think that's appropriate. I also know, Mr. Speaker, via our work on the Expenditure Review Committee and in other ways, that a number of colleagues in the Cabinet and in the Ministry are doing the necessary work to make sure that we do things differently to our predecessors, that we do have a much more robust case when it comes to allocating public money, and that we're getting value for money when we make those decisions. And so that is an important part of the work that we have been doing for the best part of a year now, and there will be more work to do on that front as well, whether it's considering some of the proposals that are put to us in good faith to make sure that this is robust. Mr. Speaker, I'll finish on this point. One of the reasons why this country didn't have enough to show for $1 trillion in debt is because the approach of those opposite, the party that used to be born to rule became born to rot, and that's why it has taken us and is taking us the necessary time to clean up the mess that they left behind. And that applies to the provision of grants in the same way that it applies to other aspects of our responsible economic management.
Give the call to the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government making early learning more affordable to benefit Australian families and the economy?
Good question. Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for his question, and I just want to take a moment to recognise how hard the member for Bennelong fights for families and children in his electorate, and the number of times that he has stood in this place to speak out for and on behalf of the families and children in his electorate. It's wonderful to serve with him in this place. Mr Speaker, in around 2 weeks' time, our reforms that raise the childcare subsidy and make early childhood education and care more affordable for 1.2 million families across Australia will take place. That's 9,500 families in the electorate of Gellibrand. That's 7,000 families in Moncrieff. That's 5,600 families in Mayo. And, Mr Speaker, 265,000 families in rural and regional Australia. And we made those changes because we recognise that for too long the cost of early childhood education has been way too high, putting pressure on families who are already struggling with the rising costs of living. And our changes will see an increase to the maximum rate of the childcare subsidy to 90% for families earning $80,000 or less, and will extend the childcare subsidy to families earning up to $530,000. But these changes will do more than just reduce costs, because, Mr Speaker, a great early childhood education and care system pays a triple dividend. First of all, it sets up Australian children for a great start in life. We know that because the evidence tells us that. Secondly, it helps families get ahead. And importantly, it builds our economic prosperity by supporting workforce participation and productivity. And that's particularly the case for women, who are generally the primary caregivers. We know that the high costs of early learning often act as a massive disincentive for women to get back into the workforce, to take on more hours or to take on more days, or to go back to study and increase their skills if they so wish. So more affordable early learning means that families can get extra income. Women can go back to work and add to the family income if they so wish. They can build their careers and they can build their retirement savings. The Albanese Labor government takes women's economic security seriously, and we believe in providing a choice for Australian women. And by boosting the childcare subsidy, we will make a real difference to Australian families. We're proud of everything that we've achieved in just over a year, Mr Speaker, delivering on our election commitment to make early childhood education and care more affordable. But we know that there's much more work to do.
Call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. On Saturday, Senator Gallagher stated in relation to serious allegations aired on the project that I wasn't aware of the full allegations that were made public when the interviews went to air. This was not true. She had in fact received a copy of the interview 4 days before it went to air. How is this consistent with the Prime Minister's statement yesterday that Katy Gallagher has been transparent in relation to this matter?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. What is being suggested here by those opposite is that Labor is to blame for what is a serious sexual assault allegation by a Liberal staffer about another Liberal staffer in a Liberal minister's office, metres away from the Liberal Prime Minister's office.
The member
Senator Reynolds, answering the question very directly, Mr Speaker. Senator Reynolds said on the night referred to in 2021, said this: I was told by one of your senators 2 weeks before about what you were intending to do with the story in my office. 2 weeks before. Senators were accused of having the information weeks in advance and setting up the story. They did not. and that is how they responded. And do you know what Senator Reynolds said later that evening, after she had had a discussion with Senator Gallagher, including Senator Gallagher and Senator Wong? She said this: "Senators Wong, I can't be more relevant."
The order. Members on my right, the member for Cooper, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My point of order is on relevance, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister has been asked about inconsistent statements and his addressing of that inconsistency and describing it as transparency. He has not addressed the question, which is his own statement about Minister Gallagher being transparent, not about other ministers, his own statement about Minister Gallagher being transparent, when she separately said two completely different things. How is that transparent?
The question was about the allegations and also Senator Gallagher's statements. The Prime Minister is giving context and information. Order. Just going to listen, but I need there to be silence in the chamber so I can hear what the Prime Minister is saying to make sure he is being relevant to the Deputy's question and he has the call.
Mr Speaker, and I'm asked about transparency. Senator Reynolds said this that evening: "Senators Wong, Gallagher and I had a very respectful discussion during the dinner break, and they've assured me they were not involved in that matter becoming public. I accept their assurance. Thank you." That is what clearly, at the time, when Senator Gallagher had
the Minister for Infrastructure,
a clear discussion with Senator Reynolds, and told Senator Reynolds exactly what she knew, and that is, and you can't be clearer. And compare that with the lack of transparency opposite, with the Gaetjes inquiry, where the former PM could have asked his staff at any time what they knew. Instead, he asked his former Chief of Staff and then Secretary. The review was suspended twice. On the 25th of May 2021, Gaetjes told estimates his report would be completed as soon as possible, but I think it'll be weeks, not days, but not months. It was 3 months past. Until then, the review was suspended. The failure to release any findings shows the inquiry was never intended to shine any light, and the government failed to answer 57 questions on notice from Senate estimates dating back to the 22nd of March 2021. And it is up to this parliament, has open to it, of course, to call for documents, has a range of...
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. The member for Gilmore has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Financial Services. How is the Albanese Labor government helping Australians access affordable, high-quality financial advice and cleaning up the mess in the advice industry left by the Liberals and Nationals?
Order. Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker. Can I start by acknowledging the tremendous contribution that the member for Gilmore brings to this parliament and the work that she does. Brings a depth of experience, a former dairy farmer, small business owner and a teacher, and a passionate advocate for the people of the South Coast and the Shoalhaven. She's right. The government inherited a mess in the area of financial advice. We saw financial advisor numbers absolutely in free fall. 10,000 left the industry on this government's watch. They had a huge gap. People were seeking financial advice and couldn't access it, couldn't afford it. They had regulation after regulation that was providing red tape but not consumer protection. And in the area of the transition to a professionalisation of the service, layer upon layer upon layer of mess. Is there any wonder that 10,000 professional financial advisors left the industry? Well, this government is going to clean up the mess that the other mob left us, and we have started this week. This morning I introduced legislation into the parliament to help smooth the professional transition and ensure that experienced advisors can stay within the industry, a proposition that was put and ignored by that mob over there. We have also announced our response to the Quality of Advice Review, and I can advise the House that we're adopting 14 of the 22 recommendations. There will be 3 streams of work that proceed from this. First, we will be removing that red tape that adds no consumer protection from financial advisors, something that this mob could have done but refused to do. It means that professional financial advisors will be able to get on with doing their job without unnecessary red tape. But our priorities in Stream 2, I've got to say, Deputy Speaker, 5 million Australians are either at or approaching retirement with more money than ever before because of Labor's transformative superannuation reforms. The average Australian is retiring with $200,000 in retirement. Every single dollar of it opposed by that mob over there. What they need is access to information and advice, and we're going to enable them to get it from their superannuation fund. Now, this has been well received by the industry and by consumer groups. The Financial Services Council has said this: the government is right to prioritise Stream 1 reforms which will lower the cost of providing financial advice and improve consumers' experience. Choice, the consumer body, has said this: we welcome the federal government's sensible and measured approach to improving consumer outcomes, and the Financial Advice Association has welcomed the reforms as well.
Before I call the member for Indi, I have the final pleasure of recognising the Shire President of Harvey Shire Council in the member for Forest electorate and the Mayor of Glenira and councillors in the member for Higgins electorate and Kingston City councillors as well. And I give the call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. The National Anti-Corruption Commission will commence in less than 3 weeks' time. In November, you said that the Public Interest Disclosure Act would be amended to ensure stronger whistleblower protections are in place before the NAC opens its doors. 7 months later, we're still waiting. Will these protections be in place before the NAC starts? And if not, why not?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the honourable member for Indi for her question and for her long-standing interest in whistleblower and integrity reforms. The Albanese government is committed to strengthening Australia's whistleblower framework, and that's why we introduced last year the Public Interest Disclosure Amendment Review Bill 2022 into the Parliament. This bill will improve protections for public sector whistleblowers and witnesses, and it will enhance the oversight of the scheme by the Commonwealth Ombudsman and by the Inspector-General of Intelligence and Security. Regrettably, the Greens Party delayed these vital whistleblower reforms in previous sittings, ensuring that the bill did not become law a month ago. The Public Interest Disclosure Amendment Review Bill 2022 was stranded in the Senate as a result of days of filibustering by the Greens Party. Despite this, the government is continuing to work on delivering long overdue reforms to the Public Interest Disclosure Act to improve Australia's whistleblowing framework for the public sector, which, as the member's question indicated, will support the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. I'm very pleased to again tell the House that the National Anti-Corruption Commission will commence operations on the 1st of July 2023. This legislation, the Public Interest Disclosure Amendment Review Bill 2022, would ensure that improvements to the public sector whistleblower scheme are in place for the commencement of the National Anti-Corruption Commission on the 1st of July 2023. And I would urge all senators to support this bill to ensure that it does pass this parliament in time for the commencement of the National Anti-Corruption Commission on the 1st of July 2023. And I'd just add this, that following passage of these amendments, the government will commence consultations on a second stage of whistleblower reforms. and this will involve redrafting the Public Interest Disclosure Act to address the underlying complexity of the scheme and provide effective and reasonable and accessible protections to public sector whistleblowers.
We call to the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Northern Australia. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its commitment to developing Northern Australia, and how is the government changing the role of the NAIF, the North Australia Infrastructure Facility?
Give a call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Solomon for his question. He has always been a fierce advocate for the North, and he knows, like I know and people in this House know, that developing the North is critical to our nation's prosperity, security and future. As Minister for Northern Australia, I'm committed to leading an agenda for developing Northern Australia that focuses on delivering sustainable and resilient growth, and that is why I re-established the Ministerial Forum on Northern Development. In our second meeting since getting elected, we met in Kununurra on Miriwong and Gadgerong country. We discussed key priorities, including the increasing momentum of the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility in enabling a diverse range of infrastructure projects right across the North. I introduced a bill in Parliament earlier this year amending the NAIF to deliver on the Albanese Labor government's commitment to ensure that the NAIF is best positioned to maximise economic outcomes right across the north of this country. These amendments to the NAIF Act will increase the NAIF's appropriation from $5 billion to $7 billion. It will add the Indian Ocean territories as part of the meaning of Northern Australia, and very importantly, it will clarify that NAIF's financing of Northern Australia's economic infrastructure is to benefit Indigenous persons, and this is an additional objective of the NAIF Act. This bill, currently before the Senate, very importantly has bipartisan support, which will ensure its passage through this parliament, and it will set, as we work together, the foundation for a better future for those in Northern Australia. But there is still more to be done. The government has provided the NAIF with a statement of expectations highlighting our priority to transition Australia's energy sector toward net zero emissions by 2050. And so NAIF projects include, that will support this objective, $610 million into the GenX pumped hydro project in Kidston and Queensland, and also $37 million in Merrick's capital Hudson Creek Power Station and the Batchelor Solar Farm in Darwin and Northern Territory. Unlike those opposite who use the veto of NAIF against a wind farm project outside Cairns, we believe in climate change and are acting to meet our net zero commitments, and the NAIF is doing its part in this regard. It is also doing its part to address housing shortages. It is investing in student accommodation in Northern Australia. $46 million of NAIF funding has been provided to James Cook Uni for a student accommodation facility in Townsville. It has provided over 400 rooms for students studying in North Queensland, high-quality communal facilities with self-catered kitchens and dining space, 348 jobs created in the construction of this facility, and a total net benefit to the Townsville economy estimated to be over $140 million. And we continue to use the NAIF to invest in critical minerals projects, which will be needed to drive the energy transformation of this country.
Call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask further questions be placed on the notice paper.